Hello, one and all, and welcome to the SuperShow podcast, episode number 224. I'm your host for this week, Jamie, and joining me, I'm very glad to be able to say, is the pluckiest squire of them all, Mr. Alex Jones, my good friend and yours. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I was going to do some sort of hand signal then when you open, and I just couldn't decide, and I had a freak out moment and just sat here stone still. I don't know what I was going to do, but I should have thought about this beforehand.
Probably for the best, because whilst I know most people watch this podcast rather than listening to it, there are still some weirdos out there who purely listen to this podcast. And if you had decided to respond with a hand gesture, I don't know if you're familiar with the art of audio versions of podcasts, but it would have just been dead air. It would have been like me introducing you and saying hello, and nothing coming in response.
No, I was going to do it whilst you were saying hello. I was going to do I don't know, do finger guns or something, but
Right, wow.
I got turned around and wasn't sure what I was doing. I should do this.
Okay, again, so there are people just listening to this podcast. They don't know what you just did.
I did the sign of the devil horns thing because that's what Thrash does in the Plucky Squire when you meet him, doesn't he? He goes, hey dudes, and he does that.
We're getting ahead of ourselves now. Okay, I'm glad that was borrowed from something at least somewhat relevant to this podcast. I thought you were auditioning for a future in like motion capping Fortnite emotes, which I presume is a job that someone has to do. Now that I say that out loud, do you think there are people in spandex with ping pong balls all over their body flossing for Epic Games?
Yeah, 100.
What a cool job.
Is it though? Like I feel like it is cool the first time you do it, and then when you're 45 and you've been doing it for 10 years, and they're like floss again, and you're like, do I have to? And then like dab more, and you kind of go.
Oh. Why are the same developers just hiring the same person over and over and over again until he's 45 and miserable? Why wouldn't you just move on to someone younger and more excited?
Because because the producer likes the control. And they like the fact that when Terry turns up, and he's been coming in for 15 years, that he's getting older and he's not moving anywhere, and he puts on that suit and he does a damn good performance. And the producer just likes their little like button of control that they can exercise. Wow. It's almost like a bullying thing at this point. Terry needs to seek some professional advice and help, and maybe get out from under the heel of that producer, because they haven't got his best interests at heart. They gaslight him regularly.
Yeah, I feel sorry for Terry. This sounds like one of the circles of hell that Dante had to wander through. So the famous circle where you're forced to do Fortnite emotes over and over and over again for a cruel motion capture director.
That's it. That's hell just on repeat. Is them just yelling different things that you're not quite sure what it is, and so you do what you think is best, but they never tell you that it's right either. They just tell you the next one to move on to, so you never know if you got it right. So they're like, do the gritty, and you're like, I don't know what that. How do I do that?
This whole conversation was worth it just to hear you say the word gritty out loud, which I think is a podcast first. You know what else is going to be a first for this podcast?
What's that?
Talking about news from within the games industry that has occurred within the past 7 days. It is something we have never done on this podcast before, but we are going to do it today. We're going to be talking about stories that you will have never heard us talk about in the history of the Super Show. Stories like the absolute bizarre situation at Annapurna Interactive. Stories like Vince Zampella's revealing comments about the future of the Battlefield series. We're even going to be chatting a little bit more about the PS5 Pro, because 1 week on, we are still digesting that £700 or $700 price tag. We're still trying to figure out what exactly that means for our wallets. And now that we've seen some more gameplay footage, and Digital Foundry have done a few deep dives, we're spending even more time than ever trying to figure out exactly what it means to be a PS5 Pro enhanced game. In fact, Jonesy, I'm starting to believe that the definition is so loose that if we referred to ourselves as a PS5 Pro enhanced podcast, I don't actually think any litigation would come our way. I think we'd get away with it.
Nice. I think we should move on to that. I think that's a good way to go. It's going to be one of those, you probably don't remember this. I'm that sad that I used to want the TV adverts for beauty products when they started doing, when TVs were going HD. They started to do like HD brows and stuff like this, HD eyelashes. I wonder if makeup companies are going to cotton on and start talking about PS5 Pro lashes and the PS5 Pro enhanced. I don't even know what you do with blusher. What other makeup is that? I don't even know.
Mascara. We could have a kind of mascara that's using PSSR or PISSA, as the makeup industry will soon refer to it, to upscale the makeup from 1080p to 4K.
Yeah.
But it's now ultra HD makeup. That's actually what this podcast is running. That's why this is a PS5 Pro enhanced podcast. We're using PISSA right now to up-res our native 1280 by 720p recording to 9020 by 1080, which is the resolution you could be watching this podcast at if you tune in on YouTube, where we are also live being broadcast around the world. Some of you may or may not already be in the chat. Jonesy, as always, will be monitoring. So if you are, even if you're lurking, say hi, reach out, ask a question. We are all ears. Even if we don't respond to you directly, Jonesy will still read it and keep it to himself. And if that's not a warming thought, then I don't know what is. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can also just listen to this podcast on podcasting platforms like Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and many more. And if you want the true next-gen experience, PS5 Pro be damned, then I recommend heading over to paisleyradio.com, where this very podcast is beamed out on Thursdays at 10 p.m. If you missed that, it's repeated on Mondays. And with that, Jonesy, let's roll on through, shall we, to, I think, one of the more beguiling stories of the entire year. Thank you. I had a moment where I was like, is that the right word? Does that mean what I think it means? But I'm pretty sure I nailed it.
I think you did.
Rating out of 10 for beguiling?
Solid 8 to 9.
Wow.
8. I'm going to go 8.
Good. I thought you were going to slip into the IGN curse and just give it a 7 and take the coward's way out, but I'll take an 8 every day.
No, a solid 8. Yeah, definitely. It was, you've got me. Okay, no, I'm not gonna derail this early.
Is it because I brought up IGN reviews again? We were talking about IGN reviews just before we went live. For anyone wondering,
no, it's not that at all. It's because I saw a short earlier, and there was that conversation that I'm sure everyone has seen, where it was women being asked to give themselves a rating, and it's that thing where everyone rates themselves as a 10, and then one of the women rated herself a 7. And everyone was like, what? Like horrified that she didn't give herself a 10. And she was like, I think I'm being honest. I'm giving myself a 7. And they were all like yelling at her that she shouldn't downgrade herself so much. Yeah.
I don't know if I get it. Is that like a weird thing where if you don't give yourself a 10, then you're lacking in self-confidence and you don't like believe in yourself or something like that?
But it made no sense either, because out of all the people they showed, she was easily the most attractive. And but 7, like a solid 7. But I think that's very good. A 7 is very, like, average is 5. This is the thing. Ratings of people's attractiveness falls into the same problem that IGN and games will have, because it should be average is 5. So the majority of people like are going to fall within, let's say, like 4, 5, 6 like range. You know, when you look at your bell curves and all of that sort of stuff, and it should be that you get diminishing returns of the extremes. And that's how things work. And so for people to go like 90% of people call themselves a 9, I'm like, what? That doesn't, averages, percentages, it doesn't work. Math better.
Yes. No, I know what you mean. And if you were to look at like attractiveness on a global scale, as subjective as it is, a 5 out of 10 probably would be like average. Probably would be the mean. But I don't even think it's necessarily IGN or GameSpot's fault when it like we're drilled into have that stuff drilled into us from school. Where if you came home from school one day and say I got 50% on my English exam, it's a bang average result, Mum. You cannot shout at me. You'd be like, it's a D.
No, but that's not an average. That's not the same, because that's not average. That is something very different. The average might be a C or a B. You can't just say 50% of your test is an average, because you might find that 1% of people got 50%. That doesn't work. I was going to say, I'm sure I've told you this before. I've seen a couple of 10s in my life, talking about attractiveness now again. Like men and women, but this specifically I'm talking about. I saw Kelly Brook outside our old workplace. I from 100 meters away, 110 yards for our American.
Did you have your binoculars out at the time, or what?
Hey, my glasses are pretty thick. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's a very attractive lady walking down this road. And as she walked past me, she obviously cottoned on the fact that I was like, Jesus, because she gave me a little smirk as she strided past. Strided, I don't know.
That's the closest you'll ever get to a 10, getting a little smirk as she passes by.
Yeah, I reckon so.
Yeah.
I reckon so.
How long ago was this? I've just looked up Kelly Brook. She's 44 years old at the moment, which
This was
certainly not old.
I want to say 12 years old, 12 years or so. I would say.
Oh wow!
I know when
So
it
like
was
around
because it was in the newspaper.
peak.
It was in the newspapers because she met with Boris Johnson to do when he was mayor of London.
Mayor of London, I was going to say, yeah.
To do a Boris Bikes thing, and she was wearing like a summer dress, and she'd walked there, which I was then like, because I saw it in the paper the next day, I was like, she'd walked to where she was going to, but like that's curious because you would have thought she'd have like a car or whatever, would drive her and something like that. But then I wondered if it was like because then the tube, we had like loads of tubes right near us, so I was wondering if it was actually not far away from where we worked, and she just like got off the tube and then walked down there. But yeah. Anyway, I've derailed.
It would also be a weird irony if like what if her agent or PR manager or whatever was like, whatever you do, don't get filmed driving to the location of a place where you're about to endorse people riding bikes for the sake of like the environment. Just walk there, please. Anyway, I apologize for derailing the podcast, but I don't apologize, and nor should Jonesy, for putting the image of a prime Kelly Brook in anyone's head. But yes, it is one of the more fascinating and curious stories I think that's appeared thus far in this entire calendar year, largely because it's one of those headlines that when you read it, you almost do a double take and make sure immediately that you read the headline correctly, because it just sounds so unbelievable, not just in its own right, but also when you sort of pair it up with the company's reputation. And that is, of course, the news that Annapurna Interactive's entire workforce has resigned. Annapurna Interactive, obviously the video game publishing, and I think at some point in the near future, even video game developing arm of Annapurna and Annapurna Pictures. We talked about them a little bit last week, of course, because Remedy notably made a deal with Annapurna Pictures last week, which saw them co-fund the development of games like Control 2 in return for the rights to make video sort of filmic or TV adaptations of any of those Remedy properties in the future. If you haven't heard of it, Annapurna Interactive, you would have almost certainly heard of some of their games, because not only are they plentiful, but they have in a lot of cases been extremely well reviewed. I'm looking like at last year, they released Cocoon and Storyteller and Thirsty Suitors. They were the team behind games like Stray, Neon White, Solar Rash, The Artful Escape, Jonesy, one of our favorites. The extremely interesting and controversial 12 Minutes, all the way back to some real critical darlings like Kentucky Route Zero, Outer Worlds, Gone Home, Donut County, Florence, What Remains of Edith Finch. Like, there was a period there. I don't know if it felt the same way for you, Jonesy, but it was like, if it was a critically acclaimed indie game of a certain, let's say of a certain ilk, like if it was a narrative-driven, critically acclaimed indie game, there was like a 9 out of 10 chance that it was being published by Annapurna Interactive. That's what it felt like, at least, right?
They've been the kid on the block for a long time when it comes to just downright like good indie games, and if it's being published by Annapurna Interactive, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's going to be an indie, but it's going to be a good indie. Yeah, and exactly like as you say, it's going to be of a certain type. It's interesting because we're going to talk about a game that we've both played a bit earlier that's from a different publisher, but Annapurna Interactive and Devolver Digital are probably two of the publishers that I hold in highest standing whenever you talk about publishers. And so, yeah, to hear that this has happened is bizarre. Like, quite frankly, when this was revealed, it was a bit of a surprise. We obviously don't know the inner workings of a lot of these companies, but when you look at their record and you look at how well regarded they are, it just seems like, I don't know, it just seems like something you wouldn't expect to happen. You know, it was stuff inside the company that bad, was like what was going on internally really bad. Like, yeah, just a really unfortunate state of affairs.
No, you're absolutely right. You can't help but ask questions. Like the joke I made to you before we started recording and before we went live was that you hear about an entire workforce resigning at once and you think to yourself, well, Annapurna Interactive is such a name within the industry and probably looks so good in the CV that surely there was at least one person on that team who was probably, sat in a back room on $30,000 who thought, actually, I quite need this job and quite like this job. I'm going to stick around if that's okay with you. Like, to get an entire workforce to resign in unison is no small feat. And it was Bloomberg that initially reported on the kind of mass resignment, and they suggested, or not suggested, they reported that it all followed a dispute with the group's owner, Megan Ellison, who I believe is the daughter of, I forget what her father's name is, something Ellison, who I think today
Yes.
overtook Jeff Bezos to become the second richest man on the planet. He's the Oracle man.
Yeah, because
Larry.
he started Annapurna, right? He's the guy, and she took it over. But I,
Yeah, he's Larry Ellison. He's of Oracle Corporation, and he's currently their CTO and executive chairman. And rapidly moving up within the wealthiest person in the world kind of index, a net worth of north of $200 billion. So yeah,
imagine. This is a really weird one for me because, like, we don't know the like we said, we know kind of what's happened, and we know why they've said it's happened to some degree. But the reality of the situation is, if you say to a company, we want to go independent and we want to peel off from the parent company, as we talked about last week, like Annapurna have got, these different arms, and this is Annapurna Interactive, this is the video game publishing side. If you don't come to a deal, and Megan Ellison or whoever else has said, actually, we aren't keen to do that for whatever reason, without knowing the ins and outs, I'm kind of like, okay, you don't get to go independent then. You can't just decide something's going to happen, make it happen. You might be the nuts and the bolts, you might be the people that make everything work today. But at the ripe old age I am, and having been at a number of different companies that I'm at, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the past of companies that get set up and get, and the way they function and people who work with them. So to have this core of 25 people who are, they must have felt like, to some degree, this is our baby. We want to we want to take it independent, and but then you don't get to do that. I'm sure that seems like it really sucks. And these people all stood together, which is nice. But at the same time, I'm a little tiny part of me. This is get the tiniest violin out for the billionaires of the world, who's like, but if they own it and they say no, do you really get to just decide you're gonna, or you just say, well, sod it then, we're walking out? Like, I wonder if what they thought would happen is that they would walk out, the company would freak out and say, okay, let's get back in a room, let's do this deal. But it seems that the opposite has in fact happened.
It does seem like the opposite has in that fact happened. Annapurna Interactive, as it remains, are certainly trying to put people at ease, whether it's people in the press or, of course, the developers whose games they're set to publish in the coming years. And it looks as though they're just going to go about the process of essentially rehiring all the roles that were lost as a result of this. But you're right, it does seem like not that something's been lost in translation, but that there just have to be more variables than meet the eye with something like this. Because as you said, you and I have worked in environments where, let's say, a parent company was created, and then brands within that parent company have gotten so large in some cases that the parent company's existence relies on those brands, and those brands were created by employees of that parent company. But if the people, even the ones who created that brand, stood up and said, I want to spin this out into its own thing, I want it to become an independent entity, and I want to be the head honcho of it, one, no one would have bat an eyelid when the CEO of the parent company said no, and two, none of the rest of us working Joes would have resigned with them when they decided to put their foot down. So that's what seems weird. Now, obviously, we can't bind or sort of align too much of our prior experiences with what's going on here. I, for example, don't know a lot about, Annapurna Interactive has been around for 7 years or so, almost 8, I think, actually, by the time we reached December. I don't know how many of the employees that left in the last week were there from the very beginning, whether they really feel like they were solely responsible for the growth or the success of Annapurna Interactive, and all the people above them are just sort of like money people. But even if that's the case, like you said, money people are money people because they're money people and they own things, and they you can. That's one of the sad realities about employment. It's that you can contribute as much as you want to the growth of a company or to the the change in direction of or fortunes of a company. But for as long as you're an employee, you're an employee.
You've got to. The only thing I can think is maybe the only thing I suppose that would seem reasonable to me is for, let's say, for example, the staff all got together, said we want to go independent. They'd raise the funds to effectively buy out everything they would need to buy out to pay off Annapurna, to say, like, we're going to go into independent, and they'd effectively been told, yeah, okay. Like, I can imagine a scenario whereby, like, working conditions, pay, whatever, there was a bunch of issues that you had, and you like, do you know what, we'd be better off on our own. It was kind of agreed, but wasn't, signed off. You raised the money to buy yourselves out. You'd done all of that work, and then on one day, for seemingly no reason, Megan Ellison had said, actually, no, we're not gonna like go through this. I could suppose if that was the issue. But if it's more like the only thing we know at this point is they want to go independent. Ellison pulled out and said, no, we're not going to do that, and then everything fell apart and all the people walked out. So it's a very strange situation, and I want to say, I think now they've brought back in, was it the old CEO of Annapurna Interactive, to sort of get everything ticking over and have everything keep everything cooking, which has got to be a terrifying prospect for the people that left, because you're like, oh, hold on, the guy who left 3 years ago or 2 years ago, who has run this business before, and probably with other people that used to work, you've got to imagine there's some late night calls and some very lucrative wage packets being offered to people that have worked there in the past, who know what's going on, who could maybe keep everything running fairly easily. Yes, it's a horrible sort of situation, but I don't know. It's very weird, man. I need to know. I just want to know so much more about this.
That's the thing. I want like an entire deep dive on everything that's going on. Yeah. The man that Josie mentioned there was Hector Sanchez. And yes, he was a co-founder originally of Annapurna Interactive, left at some point to go and work at Epic, and has now come back and taken over as president. And that is obviously a part of what has allowed Annapurna Interactive at the moment to say that they will continue to honor all ongoing publishing contracts. The only tidbit that I was able to find out there, and it was a report from GI.biz, that might have alluded to what the conflict was between the former Annapurna Interactive employees and Megan Ellison, was about Annapurna's overall decision, or sort of like movement, to integrate games more closely with its TV and film divisions. Now, that's the extent of the information that was reported by GI.biz. So anything that we say to build on top of that would be purely speculation. But perhaps it's this idea that they were looking down the barrel of a new remit where future decisions with regards to which games they picked up, which publishing contracts they entered into, which games that they kind of like started life and started gestation on themselves, because of course they have a Blade Runner game in development, Blade Runner 2033 Labyrinth, which I believe when that comes out, that will be the first game that like started life within Annapurna and was essentially developed within Annapurna. There's another development team, I think it's a film company that are like listed on the credits for that, but that was like an internal project. I wonder if they were looking at that as a test bed, and if that was going to go well, they were saying, actually, we're going to want to do more of that. We want more links or bigger links between our interactive media and our non-interactive media. And you guys are going to be spending less time going out and, spending time with the giant squids or the Sam Barlows or the That Game companies of the world, and more time looking internally at the properties we're working on elsewhere and creating synergy, because we know that Megan Ellison loves that word, probably, between our various brands and IPs. And maybe that was just really off-putting for them, and maybe went against the ethos that they thought that they'd created.
Well, absolutely. Or I mean, the other way I suppose it could have been is that because Annapurna were trying to push more into that, well, as you say, like crossover movies, TV crossover, is that they felt like they were going to lack some form of credibility if they didn't have a foot in the video game publishing side. Because effectively overnight, well, not overnight, but as soon as that deal was done, as soon as it went independent, you might have had some people saying, well, hold on, you're not Annapurna Interactive anymore. You're effectively a TV and a film studio. You don't even publish games. So this isn't what we've talked about when it comes to the deals, when it, making making TV shows, making films. What was the big one we talked about? Was it last week with that? Because Annapurna had effectively co-funded.
That was Remedy and Control too.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So maybe you've even got things like where Remedy say, "Well, hold on, you're now not in the video game sphere," and maybe it was rubbing people up the wrong way from that perspective. Like, there's so many different things that could have happened and different reasons, I suppose. Yeah, it's bizarre. It's really unfortunate. I would love to hear next week. Maybe it's not the best outcome, but all 25 staff return to their jobs and everyone's like, oh, it's not the great, but at least, because what I don't want to hear is like, there's 25 people now just done. Or what do you reckon there's a chance they start up their own independent publisher?
Well, I mean, when you tell me that 25 people resigned at once, it becomes easier to believe if you tell me 25 people resign with the plan to start up a new company, and like maybe go out and talk to investors with the pitch being, hey, we are the entirety of what was formerly one of the most successful independent game developers, in recent history. That sounds like more believable, or I'd like to believe that more than the idea of 25 people out there without severance applying for jobs and hoping for the best. That scares me. There's too much of that already in the games industry, and but you always have this idea in your head, at least, that when people do it voluntarily, even if it's a kind of voluntary with an asterisk, where maybe they feel like their hands were forced, or that they were doing it out of solidarity, you still hope that there's a safety net there. I just don't know what that safety net is in this case. Like you said, like ideal situation, like, because I don't know, I don't really have a dog in this fight as much as I usually like to back the little guy, and I just don't know enough at the moment. So really, like you said, I want I echo your thoughts. I want all 25 people to be fine. I want Annapurna Interactive to keep going, and I want the games that they're set to publish in the coming years to all be unscathed. But who knows?
This puts me into a really strange space as well, because I've had the the pleasure, sometimes the displeasure of working for a few different startups in my life, and speaking to like the big dogs, who are the guys who are the millionaires who own the whole thing. And sometimes the people who you work with on the day to day, you can be not disparaging, but at some point it's almost like they're not really that connected to every part of the business.
Yes.
And then you think, well, that's very true. But then I suppose, how could they be? Because when you grow from like a very small company and you've got hundreds of people, it's like a very different thing. But then at some sense, I do have a little bit of sympathy. Not maybe sympathy is the wrong word, like empathy, for the fact that they're like, yeah, but if you sat down with that CEO, with that president, whoever it is, and they said, yeah, but I started this when there was me and one other person, or me and two other people, and we did it in a garage, and we did it in a flat, and we did it for 5 years, and it was nothing. And then now, 20 years later, you're looking at it thinking, oh, you're not connected, you don't have anything to do with it. And you're like, yeah, but would it have existed if? And I'm like, I don't want, like I said before, I don't want to be on the side of the elite millionaire, but at the same time, I'm like, there's got to be some give and take. That's why with this story, I'm like, I just need to know. I want to know more. I want Jason Schreier to release one of his epic, like, maybe not a book, but we just need like an epic big sort of delve. Like, this is all the people in the industry have been messaging me saying this is exactly what's happened.
The initial report was a Jason Schreier report.
No,
That's
it was.
the ironic thing,
but I need the thing when he gets like all 25.
Sequel,
I won't mention any names, but I've heard. That's what I need.
Yeah. Multiple sources have confirmed to me. Sources with intimate knowledge of the situation.
Exactly.
Have told me. I do like when Jason Schreier flexes his sources. He had to do it the other week where there was a panic where some random GTA like Twitter account created a rumor, seemingly out of nowhere, thin air, that GTA had been delayed internally out of 2025 into 2026. And people were immediately like, Jason Schreier, is this true? And he was like, I've got no idea. It's like, it's the weekend and I'm watching football and I'm with my family. And then he tweeted, it was like the next working day, he tweeted, and just said like, I just spoke to 6 different Rockstar employees who all informed me that they have no individual or personal knowledge of a planned delay. And while that doesn't mean it won't happen, and I may be talking to people who don't know about something that has been signed off elsewhere in the company, that's what I can tell you. And I was like, imagine being that connected where you can wake up on a Monday and be like, right, time to email the 6 Rockstar employees work on GTA that I know about, and figure out. Yeah, it must be very interesting,
Yeah.
especially when knowing the line between what to publish and report on and what not to report on. But yes, I guess the only other element was with the Annapurna Interactive story for anyone concerned about the games themselves, because you might have been looking forward to some of them. Is they mostly appear to be okay at the moment. Certain developers have come forward and stated that their forthcoming or planned games were not affected by this. There did appear to be a weird kind of couple of days, maybe even a week there, where some of these people had contacts within Annapurna, who of course Annapurna helped with everything from marketing and PR through to helping with development costs and all that kind of stuff. So there must have been some scary moments when like emails were maybe bouncing back, and it's like this person, this email address doesn't exist anymore, and there might have been some panic. But I can say that, for example, Davey Reedon of the Stanley Parable and the Beginner's Guide fame has confirmed that Wonderstop, his upcoming tea shop simulator starring a protagonist that is suffering from some form of trauma, he's confirmed that hasn't been affected, and so is likely still going to release this year. Likewise, Beethoven and Dinosaur, the team behind God, I just mentioned it, The Artful Escape.
Right, yeah.
Their upcoming game Mixtape, which looks to be that kind of celebration of, was it 90s culture? I can't even remember.
Looks very cool,
yeah.
though.
The one with that very cool sort of stop motionist art style, lots of skateboarding, and a really cool licensed soundtrack. They've also confirmed that they are unaffected by this, and that again presumably still means that they are on course for release next year.
But then I'm
along
like,
with,
but I'm going to be really naive now. You know more about the the workings and the ins and outs of the video game industry than I do. I failed to see how, even if it was like a 3-month, more than a hiccup, let's say it was like a 3-month turmoil inside of Annapurna, as the publisher, I mean, unless you're talking about money that wasn't getting, checks that weren't getting sent to developers to pay bills, I mean, there shouldn't immediately be issues with any of these games that are in development. Should there? Like, so I don't see how that would have affected, unless your game was releasing in the next couple of months and it was going to be a literal issue of your contacts there who were connecting you with, or who were putting the game out to these platforms. Maybe they were putting onto Steam or PlayStation Store, Xbox, whatever. That would have caused an issue. But if you're making a game and it's coming out in 3 to 6 months' time, surely it's not going to be that much of an issue, assuming the contacts are made and everything's sorted out.
Like, I know what you mean, that fundamentally in most of these cases, Annapurna Interactive wouldn't have been handling any of the development duties. And so, like, the core development team that was in place and the work that they were doing would have theoretically been unaffected. I think that the specifics of it would have varied from contract to contract and, like, what Annapurna themselves were responsible for. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that, like, development costs would have been... would have been the single biggest priority. Like, there may well be contracts out there with some of these games, and it's hard to know. Again, it would have been varied from game to game. But like, there might be a contract in place with a first-time developer where Annapurna Interactive is handling is funding the entirety of development. Is paying for the entire development budget. And so when that person wakes up in the morning and finds that the publisher that's funding their game has had their entire workforce resigned, and in the immediate aftermath they don't know what that means, it could only take one check to not clear or to bounce or to just not even show up before they're like, right, well, the game's on ice and it may never come out again.
Yeah,
we need to we need to go and find another publisher, because even at the moment, like, even if Annapurna planned to just hire 25 new people, like that's one, that's a lot of hiring to do, and two, you're completely replacing a unit of people, a workforce of people who knew exactly what they were doing, who they were doing it with, and so on and so forth. Like, there's a lot of like knowledge that needs to be built back up. There's a lot of trust that needs to be built back up. So I can totally understand why someone like Davey Reedon, who wants to, publish that game inside the next 3 months or so, would tweet out being like, just so everyone knows, it seems like we're okay.
Yeah, that to me
yeah.
would be the stressful. If your game's coming out in, like I said, in 3, maybe to 6 months, I think that's when you're going to maybe be like, are we going to be okay? But I think outside of that, yeah, I mean, you would think that it's going to be right. But then I suppose it's more tricky because it's also indie developers, so you'd imagine they would have less of a buffer financially to deal with anything.
Oh yeah.
So like you said, it could be one check. That they
like
don't
yeah,
get
like
causes
what if Hector Sanchez reached out and was saying and said, we're rehiring all the positions for everyone who left, and we're also going to reevaluate all our contracts, and some of our contracts might be cancelled. And you'll sit there thinking, like, there are games that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games that are on Annapurna Interactive's current slate that don't have release dates. And so are presumably beyond 2025, so 2026 or later. Like, you might be in a stage where you have 2 or 3 years left of development, and if Annapurna dropped you, one, you can't afford to continue, and two, like, there's only so many other doors you can knock on to where you're talking to a company that can say, yes, we'll take you on, we'll sign your game, we'll fund the development, and you'll be fine. Like, takes a publisher of a certain size and a certain amount of liquidity to be able to do that.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of publishers don't,
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah, so weird time, but obviously hope for all the best for all the now former employees of Annapurna Interactive, and for all the developers and teams and studios around the world who continue to work with them. Hopefully it's just positive outcomes for as many people as possible on that front. But Jonesy, sending out an email to someone who is supporting us and having it bounce back and realize that the entirety of our support network has disappeared from beneath our feet is probably not a fate that is going to befall us anytime soon, unless of course we reach the day where every single patron that we had on patreon.com/SuperShow all decided to withdraw or withhold their patronage simultaneously, leaving us in the lurch. What would happen to this podcast if that happened? I don't know if I want to know.
Whole team would resign. No, I'm only joking.
Yeah, exactly. All 2 of us. 2.5. Chris is still with us in spirit. I don't know why Chris's spirit counts as half a person. It's like the door's half open and Chris is leaning through, and he can step in whenever he wants. But luckily, that's not a situation we have to think about too long or too hard, because we do, and we're very grateful to say it, have the support at the moment, for the time being, of a good number of you who have gone over to patreon.com/SuperShow and shown your support. And for that, we are incredibly grateful. If you haven't listened to this podcast before, or haven't watched this podcast before, and somehow have completely missed what the deal is with our Patreon, it's a place that you can go and you can pledge from as little as $2 a month. There are various tiers, and you'll find various rewards waiting for you depending on which tier you pledge at, whether you're in the market for access to our Discord server, whether you want some Patreon exclusive videos, Patreon exclusive podcasts, all that and more will be waiting for you at patreon.com/SuperShow. A big thank you to anyone who considers pledging, anyone who has pledged, past, present, or future. There are some names on screen right now of some fine folk who have gone over there and done just that, and for that we say thank you very much for your support. And I'd also like to give a personal shout out to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Ice Not Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, Pastors Guild, Xander GTI, and of course the Larry Ellisons of the world, the people with deeper pockets than even myself or Jonesy, Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Book Read, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. Once again, thank you all so much for supporting us, and for not for allowing us to not have to consider what we would do if all, however many of you that there are, resigned at once. I dread to think. We do one more episode as like a fond farewell, and then we disappear into the night.
Probably, yeah. Can I do a quick shout out to the people in the chat who are watching along with us on YouTube?
Of course.
So this is a shout out to 69 DJ, Slick, Magni, Rodrigo, Dizzy Lane. We have got John Meehan, AG, and Leo Dunlop all in the chat, and Ice Knock Rock Salt as well, all hanging out, having a good old chat. And I've seen a couple of questions pop up, and actually Leo Dunlop has made a very good suggestion, which is, can there be a question section of the pod in the last 15 minutes where if you have questions, we can drop questions and you'll answer them? Absolutely. So there was a couple of questions which I've seen pop up already, which we could get to. So yeah, I'll remember.
How do you want to do it? Are you gonna remember them?
I'll have to go back. I'd say I'll put like I don't know what it should be. I don't know what's a common emoji. Put like an emoji, a certain emoji.
Why don't you just write them down when you read them? Let's make a note of them somewhere.
Because I will I'll do something, click on a button, and then I'll like minimize you, and I'll mess something up. I haven't got anywhere open that I could write them down. Also, we don't get that many comments. It's fine. I can just scroll up and see them. It's not a problem.
Jonesy will scroll up. Okay, yeah. Well, we can absolutely do that. What did Leo say at the end of the podcast? A little chunk at the end.
In the last like 15 minutes of every pod, can we answer some questions? Yeah, of course. If you got any questions, drop them in. The only reason like when you ask questions, we don't immediately stop and obviously address them there and then is if they're pertinent to the conversation we're having, we'll do. But obviously, it would kill Jamie's vibe and flow and mine as well if we just had to stop every time to throw a question in. So there you go.
Yeah. But that being said, there are absolutely weeks where the news is so boring that your questions and hopefully our answers would be infinitely more interesting than what we had. So please don't be shy to chuck them in. And then Jonesy, you can be the filter.
I will. Be the litmus test. AG asked the question already, which reminded me that he said, "What do you make of the player numbers for the Quidditch game?" I don't know what the player numbers are, but I
haven't seen that report.
Me either, but I have actually played that Quidditch game. I can't remember the name of it now.
It's Harry Potter Quidditch Champions.
Oh, there you go. Of course it is. I've played the game, but I've not seen any numbers about it. So, like that, for example, I couldn't just jump in, but I will save that for the end. And if we do find a report about the numbers, then we can have a chat about that toward the end. So yeah, drop your questions into the chat, and I will endeavour to pluck them out. And then we'll have a chat.
So it's funny, Jonesy, what you don't realise is you just tried to give me a fantastic segue, but you'd actually already given me a different segue. Because what I was going to note was the fact that you and I and perhaps many others around the world, and this might tie into the question about how many numbers there are, got access to Harry Potter Quidditch Champions because of Warner Brother Games' decision to put the game on PlayStation Plus. It is a monthly PlayStation Plus game for the month of September. But of course, if you are subscribed to the right tier of PlayStation Plus, that is not the only set of video games that you get access to, because you also get access to the game catalog that is updated in the middle of every month. And actually, at the time of recording, was updated today, about 5 hours ago. And we had confirmation in the middle of the week. It was music to Jonesy and I's ears as we're scrounging around, wondering how we're going to possibly afford all the video games that we want at the moment. It was confirmed that the Plucky Squire would in fact be a day one PlayStation Plus catalog release. And Jonesy and I have both indeed downloaded and played some of the first couple of hours of the Plucky Squire. Certainly, I'd say one of the most anticipated indie games of the year. Perhaps it was one of those, in the same way as something like Cuphead was for many years. It was for a long time has been one of those visually arresting games that you see, even if it's in the middle of a compilation, for example, during some kind of showcase or live stream. You see its primary gimmick, which we'll get into in a second, and you go, "What is that? That was a cool effect," or "That was a cool." If the word gimmick feels a bit harsh, it's more than that. That's a cool mechanic. That's a cool idea. That's a cool visual. The question is it more than that? And to answer that question, we had to play the game. Jonesy, what are your impressions after the first couple of hours?
Thoroughly charming.
Okay.
I've been looking forward to this game for a long time. As you said, it's the visual style and the presentation which really caught my eye. I don't know that this is where it's from, but I'm gonna I'm going to guess that there is some inspiration coming in from Mario Odyssey, which was, I think, the first time I'd seen in game where you can effectively go from 3D play to jumping into 2D play sort of seamlessly. I'm sure it's happened in something before that I'm just not aware of. So I've played enough of the game that I'm into the first area where you leave the book, because so effectively the Plucky Squire is this kid's book, and you play as Jot, who is a knight within that book, and you are unceremoniously shoved from your world, from the book, and you are then thrust forth into the real world as a little 3D guy, as opposed to like a little 2D cartoon animation in a book. I've played about 20 minutes in the 3D world, so I'm probably only about an hour and 15 into the game. Like, I'm not that far at all. But one of the things that's interesting to me is that crossover from 2D to 3D was very cool. I knew it was coming, obviously, and there's a lot more to get your teeth into with that. But one of the most interesting aspects of that game for me so far is not that. Actually, it's the overall presentation of like the way that it's like the pages turn when you go from one side to the other, and then you're in a new world. It's the change between like a top-down sort of isometric style game to a side-scrolling 2D platformer to a 2.5D platformer to then like these mini games where you're doing like your suddenly it's a punching game where you're boxing and sort of like slipping and jabbing.
It's like Punch Out where you're behind the back and you can move left or right.
It's the fact that it's taking on so many of these different genres and mechanics and ideas, and I think often the reason you don't see this is because, you know, a game is made on an engine, and it kind of sticks with a certain feel and play, and it's quite noticeable when games don't do that and when they change it up, and often people don't like it. But this is living and breathing in that, where it doesn't stick to that and it changes everything constantly. And I'm absolutely loving it. And one of the aspects that you come to early on, which I really enjoyed, was the book has, like as a kid's book does, it will have words just like sort of scattered around the page and say, this is happening. And there is elements where you can take words out and then put new words in to change the lay of the level so that you can achieve a puzzle that you wouldn't have been able to do. And there are secrets where there's one in particular I'm thinking of is where there's something that says a stack of books block the path, and you can change stack to scattered. So it says scattered books block the path, and then you can make your way through. But if you take the stack from the stack of books and take it over to another area and put it into the different word to make the stack of papers that you had, say, it's a scattered papers now says stack of papers, you then have to drag a big stack of papers to fill a hole so you can progress. And I just absolutely, I don't even know. Like, it's not mind-boggling. It's kind of simplistic, but it's like, why aren't there more games that play with these elements more often?
Yeah,
I suppose.
Like, did you ever play Baba Is You?
I didn't know.
Right, that was an indie game where like that was almost the entire like crux of the game was like logic puzzles where it starts with like Baba Is You, and then like you're moving around blocks that each have the various words on them. And the way it implemented or like took inspiration, let's say, from something like that and implemented it into the world of the Plucky Squire so seamlessly, I think is really commendable. And the same thing that stood out to you stood out to me in my first kind of 2 hours or so. I'm a little bit ahead of you. I'm now, with minor spoilers, I guess, but I'm back inside the book again.
Right. Okay.
It was the fact that I was waiting for the moment where like you pop out of the book and it goes from this like, flat, sort of like not quite hand-drawn presentation, but this flat printed presentation to this, 3D platforming overworld or outer world or whatever you want to call it, that kind of has like a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of like, small thing, big environment kind of effect and feel. But I was impressed by how many ideas they kind of packed into the core gameplay in the build-up to waiting for that big reveal, which, anyone who'd seen any of the trailers or promotional materials knew was coming. And so, like, one of the main metrics I kind of went in thinking I needed to gauge the game by was, like, how many ideas it had and how fresh it was able to keep its gameplay hooks, and whether or not, jumping in and out of this book and breaking the fourth wall over and over again was going to get boring or anything like that. And the early signs are pretty promising. I also think that I, it's very hard to do to do lifelike or realistic graphics and simultaneously do this really nice like animated style.
Yeah.
From what it's worth, I prefer the children's book aesthetic to the kind of the real life aesthetic,
Me too.
just because it's just that's the nature of the beast. I was also a little bit surprised by some of the gameplay. Like I didn't know. I know it's a slightly easy shortcut to describe something as Zelda-ish, but I didn't expect there to be like a dodge roll and that the sword would
Right.
have like a combo and that you'd be buying upgrades like the ability to throw your sword or the ability to do spin attacks and jump attacks. Like that suggests to me that there's going to be a bit more like Zelda-ish like combat influence maybe as the game rolls on, but the puzzle solving gets off to a great start thanks to the stuff that Jonesy mentioned, which I loved as well. I think some of the writing was quite charming and made me chuckle. There are some very funny characters like a wizard who wears sunglasses and who loves music. Like the first thing you have to go and do is go to a bee and get wax for this wizard's vinyls because
Yes.
he's like, and it's like okay, like it's funny, and it's very self-aware at times as well. Um, the the only thing I'm not sure about is, and this is going to sound really harsh and maybe unfair, and some people are going to call me stupid, and it's because I am, but playing the Plucky Squire and playing the sequences when you are outside of the book and running around on the surface of this table, in the immediate aftermath of having played a lot of Astro's Playroom, um, really it, it makes it feel second rate in a way that it actually isn't. It's just an unfair comparison to have those two experiences so close together in my recent memory. Like there were lots of like items on the table, and sure enough, some of them are there to be boundaries to stop you like wandering around wherever you want. Like there are stacks of books or big buttons or paper clips and pencils and stuff like that. And I was like walking into them thinking like, why are there no physics on any of this stuff? Why am I walking into a pencil and it's just a static object? And of course, that's totally fine. But when you've just spent the week platinuming Astro's Playroom, it feels second rate in a way that it's not. I will also say that the first level, mechanically speaking, once you're of being outside the book, primarily for whatever reason revolves around stealth sequences wherein you are hiding from beetles.
Yeah.
And I was like, this was not the direction I think this should have gone, and I hope that this doesn't reappear too many times.
That was see. What's interesting. So I have not played Astro's Playroom, but I'm completely on board with the lack of interactivity when it comes to the overworld. Like
Yeah, okay, good.
I had a weird moment when I first came out of the book. So the presentation inside the book is phenomenal. Like down
Yes.
to the texture of the paper with the colors over it, like you can see the weave of the paper in the book, and it is beautiful. And then the design of the characters and the way you interact, like when you throw your sword can get wedged in like the wall of the book, and then you can hold R2 to pull your sword back to you. Like it's like Kratos chucking his axe. It's wicked. You then have there's a kind of ever so slightly wonky feel to some of the controls in combat, where it's sort of like it's not the slickest. But as you said, I was really impressed with the fact that you've got combos on the sword, the fact that I could see the upgrades and I knew that I was going to have a spin attack and a jump attack and all those sorts of things. Some of those are the collectibles you find, like artworks and concept arts are very well received by me.
Yeah.
But then when you leave the book for the first time, there's like the idea is that the kid who owns the bedroom is very creative, and so there's like paper clips lying around, and there's a watercolor palette that you walk over, and I was like, oh, I bet when you walk over it, your feet get
And
the
you delete
colors,
footprints.
and you
I
don't.
had the exact same thought. I had the exact same thought.
Right, and you just don't. And I was like, oh. And so one of the games that I would say this really reminded me of, like, and I think it's because you said it's the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of miniature aesthetic, is It Takes Two, which I absolutely loved. Fantastic game. And I want to say that in It Takes Two, there was not everything was interactive, but there was much more a sense of interactivity with the environment. Like even if it was throwing something at a glass jar that would make a sound and then rock ever so slightly, but you couldn't do anything else. Whereas this is much more, as you've said, it's much more like no, static physics objects which are bounding boxes which you can't go past, you can't push. If you walk into a pencil, it doesn't roll. And when you look at the size of Jot in comparison to like those things, there's kind of a bit of a disconnect in that. Why aren't I making any impact on the world that I'm interacting with? There are some elements where there's one section early on where you pick up a dice and you throw this dice into some dominoes which are stacked, and you use that to climb up somewhere. But you're the same size as the dice, so why, when you jump into the domino, does it not even move? Like it's
Agreed.
So I think you're sort of saying second rate is absolutely fair. I would love to think of a different way to phrase that. Because I'm with the developer. Obviously had, they had an idea. They've made incredible games so far, like crossing multiple genres, and I love what I've played so far. And do you know what? I'm sure they just said, we don't have time to make all of these interactive physics objects just for people that want to walk around and smile when they kick a paperclip for no reason.
Yes, but again, that's the problem. Is Astrobot is exactly that game. It's the game where say, yes, we are going to take the time to stop and do this, no matter how excruciating it is, simply because someone will do this and smile.
But
that's what
fine.
makes Astrobot.
But let's compare the size of the team on making Astrobot to.
Sure.
I can't remember who's the dev behind Plucky Squire. I literally follow them on X.
They're a first time dev. They've got a kind of a funky name. It stood out. All Possible Futures,
right?
They're called.
And this sounds like a critique, and I don't think we are critiquing them. We're just saying there's a level of production cost that goes into some things, and I think sometimes we take it for granted, and we come to assume that it's going to be in everything, and when it's not, you're like, oh, and it's just noticeable. And when you play games that have it on, but in bucket loads, it's just a little thing you notice, but again, you're like, I'm with you. Like the stuff in the book has been like wow. Like the tone, the characters, the way that the narrator comes in for certain elements, the way that you're just like the fourth wall breaking, all of that stuff. I've absolutely loved it.
Yeah, like great perspective changes. You mentioned the shift from like top down to 2D, but there's also there's 2D horizontal scrolling, and there's also 2D vertical scrolling where the camera sort of tilts, it turns 90 degrees so that you're actually looking at the book long ways and moving down the pages, if that makes sense. Some really clever stuff like that. And like I said, I really just hope... I haven't actually bothered to look up or get an idea of how long this game is, but there's a part of me that's really hoping it's like a nice tight 5-6 hours, and that they just keep it as fresh as the first 1 hour or 1 to 2 hours have felt. I just don't know if I need 10 hours of it in my life, based on what I've seen so far. That's just my feeling.
I'm with you, but at the same time, there's a part of me which is like, I've already played like an hour and 15 hour and a half. If I've only got another 3.5 hours of this, I know I'll be wishing there was more. So maybe like 7.5, 8 hours. But then
you don't know that.
That's true. That is very true.
What if we're sat here looking like plebs because we don't realize that we've seen every trick that this game has to play?
Oh no, don't say that.
Like, what if the rest of the game, when you're in the book, is just more fighting and Baba is you word puzzles, and what if the rest of the game outside the book is more beetle stealth and platforming?
So I know that there's more external. I've seen it already. Like I've seen it in stuff they've released, and I've like I said, I've been following this game's development, so I've seen a lot of other little fun things. I won't mention just in case people haven't seen them and they want to discover for themselves. But I know there's more. It made me think of It Takes Two in the sense of the way they seem to introduce different mechanics when it comes to like fighting, traversal, like whatever. The way that game played with, and the way that It Takes Two stayed fresh was every time you sort of got into a new area, there was like whole completely new mechanics to deal with that area, which was kind of incredible, really, when you think about this. That studio is not the biggest.
Great. It's great.
And I don't think this is going to go that far by any stretch, but I do think it's going to do more than what we've seen so far. But you may well be right. Like, let's say like that 5 to 6, 7 hours, I think would be very, very welcome. But
So
actually, it's true. Yeah, the story would get very long in the tooth if it was too long. Like,
right,
how
yeah,
many times can you sort of have a kid's book wizard villain fight your plucky hero and kind of
exactly. Like if this game was 10 hours long, it would be longer than the Space Marine, like 4 hours longer than the Space Marine 2 campaign. Like,
but that's not. And this is not to denigrate Space Marine. Like, that's a kind of a one trick pony game, though, isn't it? Like, you're fighting hordes of enemies, you're fighting
maybe.
bosses, and you're using stupid. I mean, you could probably get introduced to most of those mechanics in 10 minutes, and then you're happy for 5 hours. But this doesn't seem the same. That kind of ilk.
Yes, no, don't get me wrong. They are wildly different games that probably shouldn't have been compared. I just thought it was
No, I know
like,
what you
funny,
meant.
funny to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
different. Yeah, yeah. It's just funny to think about. Any other closing thoughts on the Plucky Squire, or any other things that you played or watched or did in the past week that you want to let the world know about?
So I played a very brief amount of Quidditch Champions. Not
Oh yeah,
enough, but I was actually kind of surprisingly impressed by how okay that game felt. I don't know why I
okay.
thought it was going to feel worse, but the way they've got that game functioning, it's like an actual proper game. Like, they've made an actual sports game out of it, even if it is quite. It's a little one trick, maybe. I mean, it's not going to become the next Rocket League or anything.
Yeah.
But no, and there's like a career mode, and you can work your way up and stuff. And like you said, it's this month. It's a free game this month, which is good. I'm sure Harry Potter fans will enjoy it. One other thing I was going to mention, I did watch a film which I told you before the podcast. I watched Madam Web, which recently came onto Sky Cinema. That's why I watched it, and it is horrendous, terrible film, pile of crap. So but Dakota Johnson's fit, and so is Sydney Sweeney, and
I mean,
and
knockouts.
I'm trying to think. I didn't recognize the other two actors, but they were fine as well. So if you like attractive women and you want to watch, maybe check it out. And there's a good looking bloke in it as well as the villain. So if you just some eye candy, fill your boots.
Maybe put it on mute and just have a great conversation in the background while looking at Sydney Sweeney.
It's so crap.
Has it put you off going to see Venom: The Last Dance?
No.
You're still going to go and see that?
Yeah, I just watched the trailer for it like yesterday, and I actually really like that. Venom and me have grown to. I actually quite like that trilogy. What I think that trilogy is going to become. And people,
Did you say that you and that trilogy have a symbiotic relationship?
You could say that a little bit. No, you couldn't, because I don't do anything for the trilogy. It just does stuff for me. I'm a parasite for the trilogy. But people hate it, and I quite like that, because I'm weird. I find it weird that I saw the first one and I thought, it was a bit crap, wasn't it? Then I saw Venom and Carnage and was like, okay, I feel like they've actually looked at what they are, and they've gone, we're a bit more of a joke than we maybe thought we were going to be, but we're okay with that, so let's lean into it. And I came out of that being like, that was actually like fun. Like, I enjoyed that, even though it was rubbish. And loads of people I spoke to were like, I hated that, what a terrible film, absolute crap. And I was like, okay. So now I'm kind of hoping that Last Dance is more of that, and people come out going, what a pile of drivel, and I'm going to be like, this was wicked, this is what a great trilogy.
Oh, interesting. So you want it to be as poorly received by the general public and by critics as possible, because it increases the likelihood that you're going to like it.
I don't really. I just don't care if people say it's not good, because I think I'll like it anyway. Like, there's a weird thing between. Like, I like Venom. I think Venom's a very cool character, and I think this characterization of Venom, and Tom Hardy's a phenomenal actor.
Cool.
But obviously, this isn't testing him probably as much as some of the roles he's been in. But I think they're just fun and stupid. And Venom is. How could you make a serious kind of Marvel film with Venom in? It's always going to be a bit ludicrous.
It's tough, and like this. I mean, I haven't seen the second film, so I don't know how wild that went. But definitely watching the trailer for this one and seeing a Venom horse and a Venom fish and stuff like that, and I was like, okay, yeah, there's definitely a very knowing wink and nod to the audience going on here, which probably suits it. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I want to say it was the first. There was a line in the first film, and I was like, and it made me laugh. out loud. Like, and I think, and it's not like a funny film, but and some of that first film was bad. But there's a bit where Venom says, he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna fuck them up, Eddie. We're gonna do da da da," and then it's a red Venom appears.
Oh, like, okay.
So it's not a black one, it's a red one. And he goes, "Oh shit, it's a red one." And then they start, and then they runs away. And then he's like, "What are we doing? We were going to go face it." And then it's like, "No, I'm not fighting it." And it's just like stupid. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, like that. You need more of that, like lean into how ludicrous this whole thing is." Because the plot is so terrible. Like the plot is just, I don't even know. That's why, like in Carnage, you're just like, yeah, the plot is irrelevant to that movie. You're not watching it for that. You're watching it for this like stupid
bromance almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can see that. So maybe the future for Sony's Spider-Verse isn't so dour after all for following Madam Web. We'll find out. Venom: The Last Dance is actually out next month, and then we get another one before the end of the year even hits with Craven the Hunter. Did you see the trailer for that?
I have.
Aaron Taylor Johnson's Craven the Hunter.
I didn't care about Craven the Hunter in Spider-Man 2. I was like, who is this guy? I've never heard of him. I'm not like a massive comic book guy, but I like comics that I like, and Spider-Man was never one I read. I tangentially have read other Spider-Man villains like Venom, but not because of Spider-Man. And I didn't know who Craven the Hunter was. And so when it was like Spider-Man 2, Craven the Hunter, movie Craven the Hunter, and I was just like, I don't really care.
I mean,
and the trailer didn't do anything for me on that. Didn't make me care more.
The trailer looked bad, and the hints that the trailer gives towards the nature of the character that appears to be the antagonist, who is, I believe, Rhino, like put me off massively. Because we've somehow now regressed to the point where, obviously, when you had like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think it was, with Andrew Garfield, Rhino was a crazy Russian guy in basically a Rhino mech, right?
Yeah.
And we have now regressed to the point where Rhino is an actual human Rhino hybrid whose like skin starts turning grey, and I'm like, they tease that in the trailer, and that's where I was like, this is going to be bad, isn't it? Which is a shame, because I think Aaron Taylor Johnson is capable in the right movie, and I think that Russell Crowe, he got his start as Kick-Ass.
Of course, yeah, and then he was Quicksilver, right? Was he Quicksilver?
He was Quicksilver in the MCU for obvious reasons for a very short time.
Yeah,
he was the main dude in the first Godzilla. Was very good in a film called Nocturnal Animals. If you saw that with Jake Gyllenhaal,
he was in the first Godzilla.
Yeah, do you remember the first Godzilla?
Yeah.
With the one where like what's his face? Bryan Cranston is at the beginning of it. He's like the main guy in it. He is the star of Godzilla, the first Godzilla, along with Elizabeth Olsen.
Matthew Broderick is the star of the first Godzilla.
No, not 90s Godzilla, 2014 Godzilla.
Oh, all right, say that then.
Did you think that like Jean Reno was playing Craven the Hunter or something like that? Matthew Broderick Godzilla, like, oh no!
I don't remember him. I don't even remember him in Godzilla, the new Godzilla. Like,
he's in Tenet. He's like, he comes in towards like the back end.
Wait, who is he in Tenet?
He's like the military commander who is like becomes like a more main character in like the final third.
Like, you're blowing my mind. The Tenet is I can't remember his name, but he's very good. But the main
Robert
guy,
Pattinson.
no,
David Washington and Robert Pattinson.
The main guy, the black guy,
John David Washington, yeah, Denzel's son.
Is that no? It isn't Denzel's son.
Yes, it is.
Son? That's why he's such a good actor. He's brilliant in Tenet. Robert Pattinson's very good in Tenet. Like, I genuinely did not like Robert Pattinson. Saw Tenet, was like, holy shit, he's cool, and I think he should be back. I think he should be James Bond. And then it's Keith, not Kiefer. What's his name? The English guy.
Kenneth Branagh.
Kenneth Branagh. I do not remember Aaron Taylor Johnson being in that movie at all. That's so weird. He's apparently my brain is blind to him. Anyway,
I think if you
dragging
rewatch the
this
film
on.
and I was like, "That's Aaron Taylor Johnson," you'd be like, "Oh yeah," like, but yeah, he's in that film, and
Okay,
then
fair enough. He's a good actor. He's very good. Yeah.
yeah, have we talked about Bullet Train before?
I've not seen Bullet Train.
Oh, you should watch Bullet
I
Train. Bullet
really
Train's
want
really
to.
fun.
Yeah, I meant to. Is
So
it that's Brad Pitt is in that as well, right?
yeah, that's Brad
Yeah.
Pitt. So he has a great role in that, where him and Brian Tyree Henry from Atlanta, amongst other things, play a pair of British assassins, one of which has an obsession with Thomas the Tank Engine, and
Right.
they both do kind of like very on the nose British accents, and they're both a little bit kind of like dopey. And that movie is good fun, and like that's a good role for Aaron Taylor Johnson. Anyway, he's I think he's quite capable. And I was also going to say that JC Chandor, who's directing Craven the Hunter, has done good work in the past as well. And this is almost certainly going to be the worst film he's ever directed. So, yeah.
I have a while we're talking about films and movies. After John Meehan has said Jonesy is anti Brad Pitt. I need to know what that means because I absolutely love Brad Pitt. So I need to drill down into that. I don't.
Maybe it's because you haven't seen Bullet
Train. Maybe.
What was the last bad? What was the last? Okay, how am I going to phrase this? What's the newest Brad Pitt film you've seen?
Oh my! It's got to be La La Land. Not La La Land. What's it called? What's
Not
the
La La
Tarantino
Land.
one?
Oh, Once Upon a Time.
No, Once Upon a Hollywood.
Is that what it's called?
No, what is that called? Is it not called something Land? Is it not La La Land? That's the Emma Stone one.
It is one. No, it is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I was about to say Once Upon a Time in America, and I was like, that's a very different film.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that was the last one I saw.
that wasn't too. I mean, that was 5 years ago. I'm trying to think if he's been in anything that you should have seen since then, and the answer's. Without having seen Bullet Train or Babylon, the Damien Chazelle movie, the answer's probably no.
Right.
He's got a new film that's just about to come out though, right? With Brad Pitt on Apple TV. It's coming out in 10 days. Wolves.
Oh, okay.
They play as a pair of fixers who end up having to work together, even though they are both lone wolves. Hence the name Wolves, intentionally using the plural of the singular.
Wolves. That's horrible. That's a horrible name. Wolves.
Horrible. I kind of like it, but at the same time, it's a horrible name.
It's like when people say roofs, meaning
roofs
of houses, but they say roofs, and I'm like, oh, roofs.
Roofs.
What roofs do we mean? Roofs. Ugh.
Yeah. Brad Pitt seems like a good actor. I don't know.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
he's phenomenal.
A good actor when he has a handful of peanuts to throw into his mouth.
When he's on form, he is one of my favorite actors. He's phenomenal. I think when he couldn't give like less of a shit, it's hilarious because it comes across like if you watch Troy. And like Brad Pitt, and that just seems like he was there for the paycheck. Couldn't, but he's fine. But it's fine because the film's not that great, but it's kind of funny. But yeah, when he wants to be good, he's obviously very, very good.
I know, but it's also like, I know we got to be careful in this day and age to let people's like personal lives and family dramas to bleed too much into what we think of their work. But it's also one of those things where when the child of a famous person changes their name as soon as they legally can to like eliminate any connection they have to that individual, I'm like, I wonder if they're a bad person.
I haven't even bothered following it because I'm like, you can never know. Like until there's official like legal stuff put down and charges filed. I'm like, you would never know what's gone on. Especially in broken up marriages.
But what I'm saying, in that case, you don't know what's going on, but you have a pretty good idea of what the people involved think of each other, and what the children think of him.
Yeah, but then I mean, she may be lovely, but I can't imagine that Angelina Jolie is like, you know, got all sandwiches in the picnic. Like she's been very wacky for a very long time. I feel like as an ex, she is going to be probably one of the worst exes you could have. If you said it like,
I mean, yeah.
I have kids. I know people who have kids and have broken up, and how those relationships end up, and how one person talks about their ex, especially in front of kids, and it ends up weird, very, very weird. And you're like, okay, maybe leave the kids out of this, because that's really bad. Yeah, very strange. So, but I don't know. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I've got no idea.
Yes, I guess we might never know until someone runs out of money and has to do like a tell-all book that reveals all the dirty secrets from their perspective. In which case, we'll get half the story at that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, the decision of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's children to change their names legally has no bearing whatsoever on the video games industry, Jonesy's. For as much it might have rocked our worlds.
Yeah, we've got
No, it's my fault. I'm the person who's meant to be steering the ship, and for as much as it rocked our worlds, it did not rock the worlds of many a gamer. What might have done so a little bit more was the news today, or in fact yesterday, I believe, about the future of Battlefield, because Battlefield obviously still remains an incredibly popular franchise, especially I'd say in the hearts and minds of players who have very fond memories of usually, the first game they kind of, either the first or second game that really hooked them in that franchise. For a lot of people, they go back to 3 or 4. I know a lot of people who are really into 1 or 5. The thing they mostly would all agree on, though, was that none of them really got that into Battlefield 2042, which now, with hindsight, I don't actually know how well that did for them when all is said and done. But broadly speaking, looks like it was a bit of a disaster. Certainly compared to like previous entries in the series. And to really scare you and to really wake you up, though, the news today is that Battlefield 2042 is actually going to turn 3 years old this Christmas, which, for a series that at one point was almost like an annualized franchise, means that Battlefield has been AWOL for a little while. So, turns out, now is about the time for EA to start talking about it again, and that's exactly what they've done. There is a piece of concept art that has actually been released. I didn't put it in the document, Jonesy, but it's not all that revealing, other than suggesting that there will be fighting across land, sea, and air, which, hey, in a Battlefield game, who'd have thunk? The more revealing element, though, is the fact that Vince Zampella, who most of you will probably know as the co-founder of Respawn, he has done an interview with IGN, and the reason that Vince is doing the interview is because Vince, other than co-founding originally Infinity Ward and later Respawn, has basically been promoted so much within EA that he now oversees the Battlefield franchise. And he is talking about the upcoming title returning the series to a modern setting. And I've got some quotes here if you fancy them, Jonesy.
Oh, I do.
Okay, he says, I mean, if you look back to the peak of the pinnacle of Battlefield, Jamie's note here, I love the phrase, the peak of the pinnacle. I'm going to start using that.
The peak of the pinnacle.
And then back to the quote here, this is not my opinion. It's that Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4 era where everything was modern, Zampella said. And I think we have to get back to the core of what Battlefield is and do that amazingly well, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And in the interview, Zampella also said the game will ditch 128 player matches and the pretty unpopular specialist system that both featured in Battlefield 2042 in favor of returning to the franchise's more traditional 64 player battles and a class system. So again, Jonesy, for as much as he said, it feels like you could condense that all to kind of like one-to-one vibe, to one core message, which is that, hey, we know that Battlefield 2042 did a lot of things that fans ultimately didn't like, tried some new things that didn't really work. We're going to go back to basics. We're going to go back to the modern era, which was the home of the most popular games. We're going to go back to a class system. We're going to go back to 64-player battles. And we're going to try and take the core sort of like tenets of the Battlefield franchise, and we're going to do right by them. I'm sure, I don't know to what extent you consider yourself a Battlefield fan, but I'm sure that was music to a lot of fans' ears.
So part of me thinks that he's on the money. Part of me thinks maybe he's missed the point. So I used to be a very big Battlefield fan. For me, the way I used to view it was COD was what I played for single player. For the campaign side of it, Battlefield's campaign side of it was always trash. Like they were always unfinished and really bad. But the multiplayer side of Battlefield games to me was always much better because you had the vehicular combat, you had the different character specializations, and it felt much more like an actual active war zone, right? Where so you had, obviously, as you would build your way through the battlefield and you would capture those points and you would push forward and you would have your tanks and your planes and sort of, and everything felt like a real battlefield. And in the best games that I ever played, the best matches I ever had for that was where you ended up with this line of war. And so people weren't dying every 3 seconds like it feels they do in COD multiplayer games. It wasn't like constant death, respawn. It was almost like more considered. I think he's wrong about saying that we need to go back to modern era and that's something that fans want. I think you've kind of missed the point if you think that was the problem with the most recent Battlefield games. Like, so 2042 is not done particularly well, but the first Battlefield game that hooked me was 2142, which came out like 30 years ago, something like that. No, 20 years ago.
Yeah, probably 20 years ago.
And that was that had the futuristic setting and everything, but it had the feel that was right about Battlefield games. It had that that line of war, that, you know, using the stuff that you had available to you. The only difference was you had hovering bases and, like, you know, different weapons. It didn't necessarily mean you had to lose the Battlefield formula. So the idea of like, oh no, we know what's gone wrong, we're going back. I'm like, yeah, but you've not really instilled me with confidence that you do know what's wrong. You've picked out what's wrong is the last couple of games we've made, and let's undo what we've done. And I'm like, then is it then going to feel really dated? Because you need to iterate on what you did in the past, but have it modern. You can't just make what you made before, because then everyone's going to go, well, this game belongs in 2012.
I agree to an extent, but I do think there are kind of fundamentals of the Battlefield multiplayer experience, and what you would, I think, accurately describing is that something that was a lot less arcadey than Call of Duty, but perhaps as not as punishing as a milsim, and yet was able to kind of like replicate, like, that sounds so ridiculous to say out loud, but replicate like the feeling of a virtual war, but without being like this, like I said, incredibly punishing, incredibly, like, punitive, kind of like, watch out, you'll get hit by one bullet that you didn't see coming from 500 meters away and then die and then won't be able to respawn for 3 minutes. Like, it still had kind of like an action movie appeal to it.
Yeah.
I do think there's something like, I'm not suggesting that the first person like PvP shooters haven't moved forward in the last like decade plus, but I do think there's something of that if they recapture it, it's not going to be an element of like, what have they done to progress it? It will be just, oh, this is that Battlefield experience that we've actually always liked. We just, for whatever reason, didn't really get out of 2042. Because 5 and 1 weren't disasters, critically or commercially, to my knowledge. So I think they've only really messed up one game. And again, like, the funny thing about the ways they messed up in that game, a lot of them were to do with the ways in which they tried to push the formula forward or come up with new spins on things. Like, again, the move away from classes and towards specialists felt like a pandering towards the hero shooter crowd and, you know, individual characters with abilities and that kind of thing, and it didn't fit. So I don't know. I personally, if they told me like, we're basically going to try and make Battlefield 4 again, or Battlefield 3 again, I'd be like, hell yeah, do that. Like, but maybe that's just me. But then that's because I haven't been with the franchise as long as you have. Battlefield 3 was my first Battlefield. So maybe that's nostalgia talking. I don't know.
No, I don't think, I think you're right. Like, I do think I'm not saying that they need to carry on like the era they're in now. Like, yeah, go modern, like but the only thing I'm kind of worried about is if you learn too much from the wrong things, you're gonna nerf some stuff that actually wasn't bad, and you're gonna try and introduce some things that maybe should have died, and kind of end up with a weird, oh, it's not as good as I remember it kind of thing. But then, I mean, that's not to say they need to do that. I can't remember, like, I don't know how they've done critically or sales wise, but I know I think some of the ideas they had weren't terrible. Like, you know, when they had those map, what was it? Was it 4 where they would have the big things that would happen on the map, like the building
like
would fall over.
Levolution or something like that.
It was something like that, wasn't it? Like, those are cool ideas, but I think in reality, because I think part of the problem with them is that if you change the map that fundamentally, it's difficult for people to kind of create their own way of play. Like, one of the things like CSGO or whatever seems to do so well is that it's not what the designers do, it's the fact that the designers leave so much space for the players to figure out how best to play those maps. Same with COD games, same with like multiplayer COD games. I wonder if you're doing too much as a designer into going like this, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Maybe it's like people struggle to find their own way to play, because I was remembering those old Battlefield games. It was like you get in a tank, you go to this place, you you spawn here, you do this, you hold this point. It's all about like what the players are doing. It's not about what the game's trying to do.
And the freedom and flexibility the players have, which allowed, you know, iconic moments like the guy who flies the jet up in the air, jumps out, destroys the other jet with a rocket launcher and goes back in, which then they're then immortalized in the 2042 trailer. Like, you need that playground of destruction.
But you do, but that was terrible. But that was not like they had that, and it was the ATV driving off the top of the. Was it an ATV driving off the top of a car park?
Of a skyscraper into a helicopter.
No, I don't want exploding. Like. But
that's like Battlefield at its best is like cinematic carnage.
No, like, so I'm sorry.
Grand scale.
I'm not saying don't have those things in the game, but when you put it in the trailer, it's almost like. Do you know what it's? Do you know what it's like? It's like a teacher talking to kids in kid lingo. Like, create the environment for the kids to have fun. You don't need to be part of it. So when they start putting it in the trailers and going like, "Oh, we're so cool," I'm like, "Oh, are you? Are you really?" Was Levolution in 2042, or did they take it out for that? I don't remember if that was.
There was at least a little bit of Levolution in 2042, because I remember there being a map where a rocket takes off in the middle of it.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, it wasn't
I
like.
didn't play it. I didn't play 2042.
Was it Battlefield 4 where a dam like explodes and like water comes rushing through a certain area, or one of them where like a crane collapses on top of a skyscraper and tears through it?
I remember that. Yeah. That sounds wicked. Like, it sounds so cool and it's so cinematic. But I just worry that that's the sort of stuff. It's really hard when it comes to multiplayer games. Like, if you think about what were the DICE Battleground, what are they called? The Star Wars ones. Battlefront, thank you. Beautiful games, like absolutely phenomenal to look at. Should have been like easily, you know, like been incredible. And I always found them just kind of boring because it was, I don't know, they just didn't have it. But Battlefield used to have it. And then it seemed to lose it, and I'm like, I don't know what it is, and I don't know if they know what it is, and I don't know if the players know what it is. I don't know how you get it back.
I don't know. It is hard to define.
How do you define it?
I don't know if they're going to rediscover that it, and if players will respond to it. I do think on some level that like having Vince Zampella in a position of seniority to some degree helps. Like, he's clearly someone who understands like the first-person shooter market and has done for a very long time. And like between Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, and Titanfall 2, like Vince has been a key figure on some of I think the best like PvP first-person shooters of all time. But they're not Battlefield, but they're very different to Battlefield. So it's going to be interesting to see how his oversight helps them. And it's also just going to be interesting to see like what things look like for DICE. Like, I pulled up DICE's Wikipedia page to remind myself, and I'd completely forgotten that they have become, like so many studios in this day and age, another one of the poster boys for like development times being longer than ever and development costs being higher than ever. You know, we always talk about, you know, insert PlayStation Studios, you know, company here, or insert Rockstar there, or whatever. And you look at DICE, and it's like, yeah, you mentioned, obviously we talked about Battlefields 3, 4, 1, 5, and 2042. Then they had Battlefront 1 and 2 in the middle of in amongst all of those. They even had Mirror's Edge Catalyst in the middle of all of those. And it's like, almost an, like I said, almost an annualized studio for a little while there. Between 2011 and 2017, they only took 1 year off. There was only 1 year, 2012, where they didn't release a game. Then it took them 3 years. Sorry, 2011 to 2018, I should say. They only took 1 year off. Then it took them 3 years to make Battlefield 2042, and it's already been 3 years since Battlefield 2042. And you're like, DICE are a big studio, and Battlefield for a long time there, outside of EA Sports, was vital for EA's like catalog. I remember when we went to E3 in 2018, you and me, and I was at EA Play the year the Battlefield 5 came out, and it was like, yeah, if they didn't have FIFA and Madden and all those things still ticking over, like they were becoming the Battlefield company.
Right.
Ironically, at that point, they were beginning to talk a little bit about Anthem, but we all know how that would end up turning out. So, and they've that BioWare element is still in play at the moment with Dragon Age coming out later this year as well. But
I will just point out, like, so Battlefield 2042 concurrents on Steam, you've still got in the last few months like over 10,000 regularly.
How many Concords are we talking?
That's what I was gonna say. It's still like oh my goodness. I was saying Concord was 250, so you've still got like 40 times the number of people playing it as who ever played Concord.
Yeah,
and it's an older game, so you know.
I will say internally, both Battlefield 2042 and Battlefield 5 failed to meet sales expectations within EA. Yeah.
And I do feel sorry for them because it's got to be a case of like, I would love to be a fly on the wall in so many boardrooms about video games. There has to be so many times when a game has done really well and then another version's coming out and they're like, oh yeah, we know exactly what we're doing with this. And then they release the game and it's like, okay, it should be a stone cold success. And it's like, oh, it's underperformed. Why? And then it's like, we have no sodding idea. Like, because if you knew why it underperformed, you wouldn't have done that in the game in the first place to have made it underperform. But you don't really know. So really, what you're then saying is you don't know why the last game performed well.
To a certain extent, yeah, there's probably a bit of that. But then are you not just hitting the nail on the head of like why game development is a miracle?
Games hard. Games are hard. That's what it should be. No, we don't know. Yeah. Games are hard. Like, we try, we make them look good, we make them play as well as we can, but games are hard.
Games are hard. But Jonesy, one of the things, even with game development being hard, that helps games look as good as they possibly can is powerful hardware. And we already have a pretty decent set of powerful hardware in our hands at the moment, thanks to consoles like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. People around the world obviously might have PCs with 40 or 30 or even 20 series graphics cards, still doing great numbers. Even Switch owners, you don't hear them complaining too often that they're unhappy with the visuals they're getting. But despite that, Sony, as we learned last week, continue want to push things further, and they're going to do so later this year, in November, in fact, with the PlayStation 5 Pro. Now, I mean, for anyone that missed it, Jonesy and I had our big PS5 Pro discussion last week. So for our actual thoughts on the console itself and how little it appeals to us, and what we thought of that presentation, that showcase that Mark Cerny gave us, refer to last week's podcast. I thought that there would be interesting room for a discussion around what it means to become PS5 Pro enhanced, because there's a lot of chatter online at the moment, Jonesy, and to be fair, a lot of it seems to be infighting between console warriors and people who have an allegiance to certain platforms. And a lot of it came as a result of a report done by Digital Foundry, or a video done by Digital Foundry. I think they squeezed it into their weekly podcast style show, where basically they got their hands on a proper 4K ProRes file from Sony themselves of that showcase, which allowed them to actually look through the gameplay capture and actually start counting pixels and figuring out which games were running at which resolutions natively, looking at the kind of upscaling job that PSSR was doing, and so on and so forth. And broadly speaking, they were, I think, mostly happy with what they saw. A lot of games, again, using PSSR pretty heavily to get to that 60 FPS benchmark, for example, especially on the PlayStation first-party side of things with The Last of Us Part 2 and Ratchet and Clank. And broadly speaking, they said that PSSR2, for example, was a big improvement on FSR2, which is a third party. Well, I think it's AMD's upscaling solution that can produce some pretty ugly results. And I'll be keen to see PlayStation titles and third-party titles move away from that. But it was the third-party titles where some people found some things to dunk on, because whilst looking at a snippet of 60 FPS gameplay of Alan Wake 2 from within PlayStation's own showcase, Digital Foundry found it to be running natively at 864p, so just under 900p. So lower than Full HD, and then obviously being probably very well upscaled by PSSR, and essentially outputting it as what would be seen to the naked eye as a 4K output. But obviously a native resolution that is lower than Full HD meant that there was ammunition all of a sudden for PC and Xbox and Nintendo fans to dunk on PlayStation fans and dunk on people who were excited about the Pro. I thought it would be interesting to actually go back, look through some of the leaked documentation that sent with developers, and tell people what to actually expect when it comes to PS5 Pro enhanced games. But if I stop for a second and just get your gut reaction on Alan Wake 2, because you pulled some faces as I was saying those numbers.
I think people get caught up on like native resolutions and stuff too much. If Pissa's doing its job right, and what you are seeing is tantamount to a 4K image, then the fact that it's running natively at under HD is irrelevant. Like, it's at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter what's on the screen as long as it looks good to me as I'm playing it. Like, if I want to hit 60 FPS, I don't know. Like, is it that much of an issue? Like, I mean, we're going to get to I already use like AI stuff and enhancing and filter enhancers and whatever in my daily life as an editor to do, certain things. And a lot of what AI can do now when it comes to generating pixels that don't exist is pretty incredible. And obviously this is using some AI in its architecture in order to like get the resolutions up. I don't really care, like, as long as it looks good.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I wonder how
if it looks bad, I would take that. I'll take that all back and be like, well, pisser needs to be fixed.
Well, that's the problem. Yeah, that's exactly that. So, like, there's a fascinating thing going on at the moment where, like, I wonder how many people know that this is happening to them right now and in games that they're playing and they don't realize. Like, I wonder how many Xbox fans realize that, for example, here's an interesting one for you. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, one of the hip-hop and happening games at the moment. If you play that on a PS5 or an Xbox Series X and use the game's speed mode, they call it. They don't call it performance mode for some reason. You will get 60, a mostly 60 FPS experience, I think, with some dips, that natively runs at an internal resolution, like, I think around 720p, that then gets upscaled.
Yeah.
Like, how many Xbox fans that took the piss out of the PS5 Pro for this piece of news knew that they were regularly playing games at 720p, 1080p, that were being upscaled with worse upscalers? That's an FSR2 job, most Space Marine 2, than PSSR is going to be. How many people, even on the PC side, every time they toggle on DLSS to quality mode, how many people know that immediately that game is rendering natively at 2/3 of the target resolution? If you're playing like I do all the time on a 1440p monitor with DLSS quality, you're rendering at like 900 and something p. If you play it on DLSL balanced or performance, you're going even lower. You're going down to 40-50% of target resolution. And sometimes it becomes noticeable, but yeah, like, that is the reality of the generation. Not that is arriving with the PS5 Pro, but that we are already in, is that upscalers, whether they be AI enhanced or machine learning based or otherwise, are a massive part of how games are achieving the performance targets that they've got.
It's completely irrelevant, but at this point, I just want to point out when we used to play GoldenEye 4-player split screen on a 512 TV, which would have meant that you were only getting vertically, you would have been getting what, like 250 lines
Yeah,
per box. But yeah,
outrageous.
and we had a great time. I'm completely with you. Like, the whole point of these systems, the whole point of like all these different upscaling systems, is that you can have a game with a higher frame rate that looks good, even though the native resolution's lower. But then I'm like, so I come down to, like, as long as it looks good, I don't care. Even if that quality does noticeably dip, as long as it's not pulling me out of the experience that I'm having, it's almost like the what do they call it, like foveated rendering, for example. I don't care, like in something like foveated render, they could render the 3 pixels that I happen to be looking at, and you could tell me the image is only 10 pixels wide. I don't care, as long as it looks good, as long as you have some super clever technology which is making what I'm specifically looking at that point in time look okay.
Exactly.
I don't numbers. It's that thing about like I think you can get too caught up in these specific numbers, and I think if the PS5 Pro is doing this stuff in order to get these games running as we were told they would run on the PS5. I want to. I absolutely eat my hat if it turns out that that it looks crap and the frame rates are still like 45 frames and they don't look like, yeah, fair enough. But I don't know. But then I'm one of these heathens who doesn't care about playing games at 120 frames a second.
Like, I don't think you are a heathen. I don't think you are a heathen. Like, I do think it's kind of like you said, like, there's a certain amount of innocence and youth that has been lost amongst gamers in the past decade to 2 decades, as we've become, like, as a community, or whatever you want to call it, a little bit more tech savvy and a little bit more aware than we ever were before. And I'm sure there were people on the PC side, for example, that had to be more aware of frame rates and resolutions as a result of just like making sure they're getting the right experience. But when we were playing on PS2s and PS3s or Xboxes and Xbox 360s and GameCubes, we weren't pixel peeping. And it's almost like when how Adam and Eve didn't know that they were naked until they ate the forbidden fruit, and then realized they were naked, and that's what made them realize that they should be embarrassed that they were naked. But before that, it's like being naked didn't mean anything. Do you know what my favorite example of it is? How many people back in the days, the PS3 is the better example on the 360, but how many people who still to this day love and have amazing memories of Red Dead Redemption knew that they were playing that game at 640p, sub HD, 640p, and it still couldn't run at 30 consistently. And that's a 640p video game.
But I think you make the point there really well. Like, I think to play on console sometime is to almost have, like, you know, the bliss of ignorance, in that you can just enjoy the experience. And I think you nailed it when you say part of the thing that PC gamers have, which is different, is because they have to be much more attuned with what their machine is capable of, because, you know, you're constantly throwing like, can your machine run this? Can you this? Is your graphics card doing this? So your settings so they just know more in general. And I think that PC awareness has bled into console gamers, and I think that's why we end up talking about all this stuff. But then the games that I have played and how terrible they must have looked and ran. I've played games that probably get us like 4 frames a second at like the worst points, and you crack on, and the rendering like distance is like 10 meters in front of you, and you just like, oh no, this game's great. And then nowadays
PS1 and N64, the generation of fog, where characters couldn't see
Turok.
50 meters in front of their faces.
Did you ever play Turok on the N64? And like now, I think that if I remember rightly, that game, you'd be like running along and then someone would just like appear like in your face, because it was like, oh, it's the fog, like the fog of war. You're like, oh, is it, or is it rendering distance? But I know people that absolutely, and this is, you know, I know a lot of people like, these old fucking games, why do you care? My whole point is, you can enjoy those sorts of games and have an amazing time if you don't constantly like pixel count, as you were saying. Like, and I think we can get too caught up in it. And as long as you're having a good time, as long as there's enjoyment, as long as what you're doing is good, I don't think it necessarily matters.
I agree. There's a part of my brain I can't switch off, but I know that in my right mind I agree with you.
But then I will, let me completely flip what I've said on its head and say, but at the same time, when you're talking about a PS5 Pro, which is going to cost £700, 800 if you're going to go out and get an external disc drive at the same time, to having to like pixel peep and say like, well, this game is not going to run at 60 or this game's only going to have this resolution, does seem kind of crazy to be looking down the barrel of 2025, 5 years into the life span of the PS5, and we're still talking about hitting a consistent 60 at 4K like that.
Yes.
So I will give you that massive caveat and say I'm completely with you if that's what you're talking about.
Not least of all because it's a thing we still haven't broadly achieved, in spite of the fact that it feels like we're on the second generation in a row where companies have tried to use that as a marketing beat. 4K 60.
Which is crazy.
And like when you're being sold on something that you're still not getting, all of a sudden paying a bit more attention to how close you're getting to it maybe is a bit more acceptable, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree. The numbers are interesting. Like you can look at the numbers and go, "That's interesting. What this is doing is interesting." I think we're almost to the point though of where upscaling is going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to be so good. We're just not going to like that surely is going to be the revolution. Like it's going to be you're playing this game at 120 frames a second. Native resolution is going to be like 200 by 200, and it's going to look like it's 8K because everything is being done by an AI upscaler that's just so good. And the systems can run anything. Like it's incredible, and we're not going to care. And then we can all forget about it, and we can just focus on the games. And we'll all have ray tracing. We won't have to talk about ray tracing and the dawn of 4K cards, and then be like, 40 series cards, and then be like, yeah, but never use ray tracing because I don't want to run at 10 frames a second and not be able to see anything when I go inside a room. Like we're just going to have everything we want. It's going to be brilliant.
There will come a time where that stuff begins to pay its dividends beyond the plethora of ways it already is. And like you look at the way that Nvidia have used Cyberpunk as almost like a weird test bed for some of their weirder shit, all from path tracing through to frame generation and all that kind of stuff. Like there will come a point where AI can very handily upscale images with astronomical precision and generate frames extremely accurately and to double frame rates and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, when a developer knows that, hey, we need to get this game running at 540p 30 frames a second, like that will be or 540p 15 frames a second, and AI will do the rest.
Their job is going to be so easy. They're just going to be like, oh yeah, all right, no worries. Yeah, we'll finally get Beyond Good and Evil 2.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, I'm not sure I think it's going to take a little bit more than that. But again, one thing the Alan Wake situation did teach us is that while Sony is still asking as many developers as possible to use PSSR to upscale games to a what would be 4K resolution with 60 FPS gameplay, there will be other scenarios that allow games to become PS5 Pro enhanced. I thought I'd just run through what those scenarios actually were, just so, again, when people start seeing that label pop up on boxes or in storefronts later this year, they know what could be going on under the hood, so to speak. So one thing, for example, is if a game runs at a fixed resolution on PS5, so if a game runs at like 1440p on PS5, if you can increase that target resolution to say, 4K, for example, I'm just throwing numbers out there, that can earn you a PS5 Pro enhanced label. If a game runs at a variable resolution, so let's say it runs between 720p and 1080p, and that resolution varies, depends on what's going on screen to maintain a frame rate. If you can increase the maximum resolution for that, so you can say, on the PS5 Pro, it varies between 1080 and 1440p, that will get you an enhanced label. If you keep the same resolution, but you're able to increase the experience from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, so again, example, a game runs at 1440p 30 on a PS5 Pro, PS5. If you can get it to a 1440p 60 on a Pro, you can get yourself a label. And the weirdest one to me, there is some insinuation in the documentation given to developers that if you are merely able to enable some ray tracing effects that are not present on the PS5, then you could get an enhanced label. Now, I think if that does ever actually happen and we get a PS5 Pro enhanced video game that is identical in resolution, frame rate, image quality, but simply has better ray tracing. I can see people not being too pleased about that. So I doubt, or at least I hope, there aren't many developers targeting that as the sole improvement. But it is interesting to see that it's actually behind the scenes in what PlayStation are telling developers in terms of how they utilize that additional power in their hands. They're a little bit more relaxed, and certainly I'm guessing all of this is with the added caveat that like hopefully PSSR does some heavy lifting. But the other thing I will also say from the Digital Foundry thing that we learned is that there are even some first-party PlayStation games. The one that immediately comes to mind is Horizon Forbidden West that don't appear to be using PSSR yet in their PS5 Pro versions for whatever reason. Don't know if that changes later down the line. I don't know why a team wouldn't use it. Like I think if you had the option between FSR2 and PSSR, and they were both as easy to implement, I have no idea why you'd go for the inferior one. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's quizzical. I'd be interested to know why. I the idea that games could earn themselves an enhanced sticker for something so relative is makes me a little uncomfortable. Like, was it they showed off was it Gran Turismo where you had the ray trace reflections in cars, and
Yes,
that game runs at 60 FPS anyway. So I get there's a weird.
I want to say that Digital Foundry believe that the PlayStation 5 Pro version of Gran Turismo with ray tracing on in the races runs at a lower native resolution than GT5 does on PS5.
Because
I want to say that's what they found.
Because they got the ray tracing turned on, so there's more heavy lifting going on.
In theory, yeah, ray tracing is on during the race, and PSSR could be used to account for a higher output.
So, for example, the one thing that sort of bothers me a little bit is, let's say, for example, you bought a game and you had it on the PlayStation 5. You then got a PS5 Pro. You could play that game on your PS5 Pro, but then that game is also released as a PS5 Pro enhanced version, and you then fork out another 70 quid because you want to play the enhanced version of the game, and then it's something like there's ray trace reflections. That makes me a little uncomfortable if they're not necessarily going to be explicit as to. Maybe they would actually. Maybe they would come out and say this is the enhancement. This is what's going to be different about the gameplay. It's a bit strange to me that there's no objective level of what enhanced means across the board, like minimum resolution, minimum frame rate, like minimum amount of ray tracing. It's just because it almost feels like.
I think it's because it's based on the benchmark you set with your PS5 version, right? That's why it's hard to say.
Right. In which case, it's like, why would it not benefit companies to release two versions of games specifically so they can, maybe they turn stuff off in the PlayStation 5 version that they could have included to then have an enhanced version as well, just to stick out two titles.
Now that is cheeky, but I mean, it would technically be following the rules, yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of that. Like, I'm not.
Me neither.
But I don't know. It's, there's
the proof will be in the pudding, right? The proof will be in the pudding. One thing we do know is that PlayStation are being very firm on the fact that the PS5 Pro cannot be used simply for stability. So if you have for example, a variable resolution, you cannot just say, oh, the PS5 Pro spends more time at the ceiling of that variable resolution, PS5 Pro. Likewise, if you have a variable frame rate or like an uncapped frame rate, you can't just simply say, oh, the PS5 Pro hits higher frame rates or maintains 60 more often or something like that. Stability is not considered an improvement. That. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one thing that they will be keeping an eye on.
Because that would suck. Because that's just almost like, because that's effectively, if you just run the same game, that means you can just release two versions that are identical, one with an enhanced sticker, one without, and then it's just the same thing.
Literally.
Which would be, that would be really scammy if people did that.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be rough. Like anyone who remembers the launch of the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X will know that like, this will probably be a really awkward Christmas period, and as was the case, I remember with the PS4 Pro, like there probably will be some weird case where like a game comes out and people go, for some reason, it kind of seems like this game runs better or looks better on a PS5. Like there will be weird quirks that happen. I think the I think it'll be more interesting to see where we're at and what the differences between the platforms are by the end of the generation. The problem is for Sony, that's not a great way to sell a $700 console out the gate, is by promises for the future or anything like that. But
Right.
yeah, as a consumer though, that's one thing I'm telling myself, and one of the reasons why I'm not gonna cry myself to sleep if I don't end up getting one this year. Like even the PS4 Pro, I think I waited till February, March of the following year, which was when
Right.
Horizon came out, because I was like, well, I might as well wait till there's a game that looks significantly better with this console rather than just buying it. I might just do that again, depending on how things are financially. Oh God, Patreon.com/SuperShow.
I actually saw a couple of people talking about effectively trying to say what is the closest graphics card that you could pick up to what a PlayStation 5 Pro is
Oh
putting
yeah,
down.
there was a lot of that.
There was loads of that, and ironically, I think I saw quite a few that said that the graphics card I have in my PC is pretty much on par with
3070.
3070 Ti specifically.
Right.
Was what they, and the way they did it was they said, knowing that the power of the current PlayStation 5 graphics card is X, then this is 45% more powerful, so let's look at 145% the power if you benchmark it against a similar graphics card. And I'm pretty sure the 3070 Ti was, I'm pretty sure it was almost bang on. But I didn't know. I think maybe there was another one that was closer, but I can't remember what it was. So then I'm kind of like, I know how games look on my PC. They look very nice. But do I really want to go and spend that much more on a PlayStation to play PlayStation exclusives? Probably not. I still think the PlayStation 5 is a phenomenal bit of kit to have sat in your lounge that my kids play Astro's Playroom on, or whatever what's the one that you got free? Not Playroom.
Astro's. It was Astro's Playroom.
What's the new one called?
Astrobot.
Okay. So like it's
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And like for as much as like the PS5 not having any games has been a meme so far this generation, there is also still an element where I'm sure a lot of people picked up a PS5 and still feel like they haven't been delivered like the magnum opus for that console yet. Like they haven't seen like the heights that it can hit, especially with so many cross-gen games. Like you talk about how God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West and Spider-Man 2 were all released on the PS4 as well. Like, we haven't reached the point where, for example, like you mentioned PlayStation Studios and their first-party releases, where they've said, here's the big, exciting new thing from a Naughty Dog or a Sucker Punch or an Insomniac that's PS5 only and is really going to blow your socks off.
Do you see anything coming? Do you see anything coming out that is that you know of and that we're expecting? The only thing I can think of is like was Wolverine, but then
I mean, I think Wolverine and Death Stranding 2 are kind of the only things that have been announced.
Right.
Like, I'll be totally honest. I know that they've been quite public about nothing releasing anytime soon. I did think that they would use the summer as an opportunity to increase awareness a little bit more or get a little bit more excitement going. Around their first party output, and then when it became clear that the PS5 Pro was going to be this year, again, I thought, well, a new console, now is the time. Even it doesn't matter if these games aren't coming out. Now is the time where you say, now, even if it's a lie, now is the time where you put out a Ghost of Tsushima 2 teaser. you put the date 2025 on it, even if internally it's already in 2026, and you cross that bridge when you get to it. And they haven't done that. So yeah, I'm a little bit surprised, and I think it just speaks to the thing that we've been talking about for months now, maybe even years. The thing we kind of just talked about when we talked about DICE and the future of the Battlefield series, which is that and the thing that Concord only reinforces, which is that games take longer to make than they've ever taken before, cost more than they've ever cost before. It's harder to predict what people want and when they're going to want it than ever before.
Yes.
And the hardware isn't the limiting factor anymore, right? Like for a long time, like you think about the jump from the PS1 to the PS2, it was this overnight thing of like, oh my God, look at what the new hardware
Right.
can do, and look at what we can do with it now. The PS5 Pro is confirmation for anyone that was still holding out and believing it, that like the hardware's not the limiting factor anymore. We are. The fact of the matter is, like, it doesn't matter how powerful the PS5 and the Xbox Series X or the PS5 Pro and any future Xboxes are. What matters is the fact that making a game that looks as good as those consoles can possibly manage takes 8 years and costs over $100 million. That's the problem. And
which seems like quite a big problem when
yeah,
it takes 8 years to figure out you got it so wrong, and you've lost so much money. Yeah.
yeah. Like not everyone can do what Rockstar will have done by this time next year, which is, you know, they made one of the best-selling games of all time, and they didn't follow it up for 12 years. And in that intervening 12 years, they made one other game. They used to make you know, in the early noughties they made 3 GTAs in 4 years, and now they're going to make 2 in 12. Like they are the biggest reminder, like the kind of the flashing beacon in the sky of look how long this takes and look how much this costs. I don't believe any of the price estimates that have gone around for GTA 6's budget that you'd see on social media, but it's definitely going to be a lot. It's going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions by the time they're done. I don't know if it's going to cross over into the billions like some people believe, but
what's crazy about
yeah.
that is like that's fine when GTA 5 is a game which has made billions, but then of course, like there is a chance that Rockstar miss, and
Yep.
suddenly it does. You don't get people playing GTA 6 online. You don't get people buying shark cards. You don't get it to be the revenue stream that GTA 5 was, and suddenly you're like, holy crap, we've made a massive mistake. We have lost a bloody fortune, and we are so invested in this one game because that's, like you said, they've 2 games in 12 years. And that seemed, and it wasn't that long ago that didn't seem like it was that possible, but now it does seem like that's totally possible for like companies to do that and get it so wrong. And
Yeah. And if they get it wrong, like then they cannot. Then their current means of working is unsustainable. The only reason they're able to do what they have done with GTA 6, and they might never be able to do it again, was because GTA 5, as you said, did so well, and because they've managed to earn themselves such a reputation. Like they're developing the most anticipated video game of all time, which is not nothing. And like yeah, if it goes wrong, then either they have to kind of like close up shop, or they have to find a way to make these games every 2 or 3 years. And the quality, and then the quality, and it's tale as old as time. The quality goes down, the consumer enthusiasm goes down, and you've got Assassin's Creed Valhalla in your hands, and you're like, "How did we get here?" And it's like, you know exactly how you got here.
Yeah, I know it's completely irrelevant, but just because I've been doing research on it recently, I love this fact: Ms. Pac-Man made $2.5 billion, and you think about how long that game took to make. I want to say it was like probably like a month, and it was like 3 MIT students who weren't even like proper full-time game devs, I think, at the time, and it took them that to me that blows my mind still, and how much money games like that made back then. And you look at now, what developers have to do now.
Oh God,
is absolutely crazy.
Hearing developers talk about like the PS1 era and like the late 90s and saying how like you could greenlight a game and a group of 15 people will wander off and make it in a year, and you'd release that game and it would go out and sell 10 million units. And you're like, hang on a second, like that was at a time where like that's 10 million units where games cost a remarkably similar amount to what they cost now.
Yeah.
Like the price of video games is only going up by $10 or so, $10 to $20, like in that 25 to 30 year interim, and they were selling a number of units that you would bite someone's arm off for today at 10 million, and that was just a bunch of developers sat in a back room for a year.
Not
yeah, it's It's a fascinating business, and I don't know how sustainable it is. But
I was going to say, so
yeah.
John Meehan in chat said, Miss Pac-Man was a great game. It's also Ms. Pac-Man, it's not Mrs. Pac-Man. I just have to correct you on that one. I apologize. Ms. Pac-Man was a great game. Ms. Pac-Man's phenomenal. I'm not denigrating the game. I'm saying it's just when you consider the length of time of development, how many people it takes to develop, and how much money they could make. Like, it's obviously a different world because you're talking about arcades versus like home games and things. But that just always blows my mind. Like, but yeah, when you consider how much money, time, effort, resource has to go into making video games, like just the power, the cost of power, the amount of power used to make a game and then to play it is insanity. Like, how many nuclear power plants over development and playing has GTA 5 used? As friggin' crazy. But yeah,
I don't know. That's for someone smarter than us to figure out.
it is indeed. I would say
any questions from the chat before we
No, we don't have any questions in the chat, but the main thing that's
hang on. I thought there were literally, I thought someone recommended we have a question section because there were questions.
Yeah, Leo Dunlop recommended, then didn't ask a question, and then no one else did. But there was kind of a back and forth, and you don't have to say this if you don't want to, but there was a little bit of a guessing about how old we both were that was going on in chat as we were talking. You do not have to tell anyone how old you are.
My age isn't private, but I'm curious to hear the guesses.
Well, I'm guessing Jonesy's 40. Jamie's. Some people are saying that you were in high school in 2018, so that sort of kicks it all off. Then Rodrigo coming in saying Jamie's 31. Dizzy Lane saying that Jonesy's in his late 30s. So you are apparently 28. I'm going to say that was one of the closest guesses that was there. Actually, sorry, not closest. What am I talking about? I just remembered how old you are. So yeah, no, that's not the closest.
And the person who thought I was in high school in 2018, that would mean that I am 24 now at the oldest.
So for you, we've had 24, 28, 31. For me, I've got early 40s, pushing 40, 36. I've had Jonesy looks like he's in his late 30s. He's maybe 40, but doesn't look it, which I appreciate. Thank you very much.
It's weird. Like, I don't know if this is just because of the age you were when I met you, and the fact that you, to my eye, just haven't aged that much. I thought that guesses for you would be a little bit more generous.
What, as in younger?
Yeah. No, like I feel like if I was asked to get if you Men in Black thing to me and asked me to guess your age, I feel like I might have been more generous. But that might just be because I know you.
Yeah, I reckon it's because you know me. Go on then, Jamie. How old are you?
I think it was Rodrigo who got it bang on. 31.
31.
So there you go.
And no one said my actual age. Oh no, they're very, very close. I am. I'm very close. Pushing 40. I'm 39, but I'm 40 this year. So yeah, and Chris was 40 earlier this year as well. So I should say.
Yes. So you two, I always remember you two are very close in age, and that I am not far off being a decade younger than you both, which brings me such joy. So there you go. Those are our ages. Such trivia and more could be yours to discover, not just by listening to future episodes of the Super Show podcast, but by joining in the fun and heading over to the Super Show YouTube channel and watching us when we live stream. We usually try to be pretty good about going live on Tuesday evenings, as we did tonight, and as we have, I think we've been on a pretty good run the last 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes it slips by a day or so, but you know what? If you're subscribed and you've got that bell on, then you've got nothing to worry about, because you're not going to miss a show. So yeah, I'm down to answer questions from the chat. So if you feel like you want to contribute anything, that's the place to go, and that's the way to do it. Jonesy, unless you've got anything else to say.
I've got one for you from Jose A, specifically for you to say, Jamie, have you talked to anybody from Football Daily and All Time and that recently?
I don't know how to answer that question. As in, like, how. Well, I don't know if this will. It always blows my mind that people still remember, like, All Time and God, because I could get weirdly personal. Like, I don't know if you know this, but like someone from All Time is getting married this weekend, and like we know people going to that wedding, for example.
Yeah, so,
And
well,
like,
I'm assuming it's the person who didn't have a stag do where we were going to do it. Is it not?
wait, no,
Oh, is it not who I'm thinking
no,
of? Oh, okay. It's
I
someone
don't,
else.
I
Someone
don't know
else.
if it is who you're thinking
Okay.
of. It's someone who like you were more likely to have got invited than I was, but in the end, neither of us did. Um, but
Oh, weird.
I,
Okay, I don't know who that is.
Yeah, but to answer Jose A's question, like, yes, still very much in touch. I don't know if this is like too weird to be saying on a podcast, but I actually live with someone who worked on football daily, so that's in a non-romantic way, I should say, in a very in a platonic way. And uh, I went for drinks on Friday with God. There were about probably a half to two-thirds of the former football daily team there, and I'd say between you and me, like we still keep in touch with a lot of the all-time crew, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where possible.
There is talk about getting together with the all-time conspiracy guys.
Yeah. Now just interesting.
Just interesting. Yeah, and I talked to some of the other guys on all time for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're
they
doing
still
all right.
meet up.
We're doing all
Like
right.
a lot of them still meet up as well. And I'm terrible. I should make more of an effort to get down and see them. But often having kids and stuff is not the most conducive to sort of like swanning off to London and having a day out.
That's the
Unfortunately,
thing.
but yeah,
Lots of people have got married. Lots of people have had kids. Even more people are getting married or about to have kids. People have moved around. Not everyone is in London anymore. People are dotted around all over the place. But yeah, we do a pretty good job. A lot of those relationships that you used to see play out on camera weren't for show. They were actually rooted in something a little bit more tangible, which is always nice, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I don't like Jonesy that much, but I'm just doing
Ouch.
this for the patrons. I'm just doing this for the patrons. They're the reason I come back every week. No, I'm joking. Thank you, Jonesy, for being such a wonderful co-host this week.
Thank you, mate.
Did you have fun?
I did indeed. Stellar job presenting as always.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for hanging out, for watching, for listening, however you chose to join us this week. And with any luck, we will see you all once again this time next week. Same place, same time. Until then, have a good one.